Here is today's featured headline in space. The Golden Dome missile defense system could cost anywhere from a few hundred billion to a few trillion dollars, a report concludes. Today is September 15th, 2025, and you're listening to Space News First Up. Here are today's other top headlines. Maxar continues to warn that proposed budget cuts for commercial imagery could jeopardize battlefield operations. The CEO of commercial space station developer VAST said he supports NASA's revised approach to supporting such stations. China conducted another static fire test of its Long March 10 lunar rocket. And Airbus, Leonardo and Thales are making progress on creating a joint venture of their space businesses.
First Up is produced by Space News, the industry standard for professional space journalism. Visit spacenews.com for breaking news, policy updates, and original analysis.
We begin today with news that the Golden Dome missile defense system could cost anywhere from a few hundred billion to a few trillion dollars, a report concludes. The study by the American Enterprise Institute, published Friday, estimated Golden Dome to cost between $252 billion to $3.6 trillion over 20 years. The vast range underscores how many questions remain unanswered 8 months after U.S. President Donald Trump announced the initiative. The report modeled 6 potential architectures and found that even modest shifts in objectives can drive costs sharply upward, with space-based interceptors the biggest factor by far. Trump said the project would cost $175 billion, but the report concluded that would buy only a limited system, inadequate against the scale of China's and Russia's arsenals. Maxar continues to warn that proposed budget cuts for commercial imagery could jeopardize battlefield operations. Suzanne Hake, general manager for U.S. government at Maxar Intelligence, said at the Global Aerospace Summit last week that there continues to be more demand for commercial imagery among combatant commands than what is being supplied. Her remarks underscore growing unease in the industry as the Trump administration's 2026 budget proposal moves through Capitol Hill. That request includes a 30% cut for the National Reconnaissance Office's budget for buying commercial electro-optical imagery and cutting funding entirely for commercial radar imagery. Maxar Intelligence, a unit of Maxar Technologies, is the largest U.S. supplier of high-resolution electro-optical commercial imagery. The CEO of commercial space station developer VAST said he supports NASA's revised approach to supporting such stations. Speaking at the Global Aerospace Summit last week, Max Hayat said NASA's new approach, which includes awarding several funded Space Act agreements, would enable companies to go faster and provide backups should one awardee falter. Having a 4-person, 30-day demonstration mission, a controversial aspect of the new strategy, is a stepping stone to permanently crewed stations, he said, and more effective than trying to start with a permanently crewed station. China conducted another static fire test of its Long March 10 lunar rocket. A shortened Long March 10 rocket first-stage test article with 7 engines fired for 320 seconds during a test Friday at a pad at Wenchang spacecraft launch site on Hainan Island. The test focused on evaluating the performance and capabilities of the 7 clustered engines for the rocket's first stage for low-thrust operating conditions and secondary restart capabilities, Chinese officials stated. They called the test a complete success. Long March 10 is a 3-core, 3-stage rocket designed for China's crewed lunar landing program. Reuters reports that Airbus, Leonardo, and Thales are making progress on creating a joint venture of their space businesses. Industry sources said the 3 companies are attempting to complete an initial agreement creating the joint venture, valued at €10 billion, $11.7 billion, in the coming weeks after earlier negotiations stalled in the summer. The CEO of Airbus said last week that his company was still committed to the effort, which seeks to create a European champion in space better able to compete with American firms.
Discover your next mission in the space industry with the Space News Job Exchange. Visit jobs.spacenews.com to find top aerospace roles and connect with leading employers. And for employers, use discount code JOBEX for 15% off your next purchase.
In other news, a Cygnus cargo spacecraft is on its way to the International Space Station after a launch Sunday evening. A Falcon 9 lifted off from Cape Canaveral, Florida at 6:11 p.m. Eastern, placing the NG-23 Cygnus spacecraft into orbit. The spacecraft is scheduled to arrive at the station early Wednesday. This is the first flight of a larger Cygnus, called Cygnus XL, with 33% more payload capacity. NASA plans to keep the Cygnus at the station through next spring. NG-23 was the third Cygnus mission to launch on a Falcon 9, and a Northrop Grumman official said at a pre-launch briefing that at least one more Cygnus will launch on Falcon as well.
Share your company's news with the entire space industry through Stellar Dispatch, the press release service from Space News. Learn more and use discount code SD2106 for 15% off when you submit yours at spacenews.com/stellardispatch.
Space.com reports that a Progress cargo spacecraft docked with the ISS Saturday. The Progress MS-32 spacecraft docked with the station at 1:23 p.m. Eastern, 2 days after its launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. The spacecraft, called Progress 93 by NASA, delivered 2.8 tons of supplies, propellant, and other cargo for the station. Russian SpaceWeb reports that Russia launched a GLONASS navigation satellite Friday night. A Soyuz 2.1B lifted off at 10:10 p.m. Eastern from the Plesetsk Cosmodrome and placed into orbit Cosmos 2595, a GLONASS K navigation satellite. The launch also deployed Mojits 6, a small-sat secondary payload developed by a Russian military academy for technology demonstrations. Newshawk reports that a Falcon 9 launched more Starlink satellites on Saturday. The rocket lifted off from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California at 1:55 p.m. Eastern, putting 24 Starlink satellites into orbit. The launch was the 300th mission devoted to Starlink, with more than 9,700 Starlink satellites carried on those launches. SpaceX currently has about 8,400 Starlink satellites in orbit. One of 2 space science satellites launched in July is communicating again with ground controllers. One of the twin NASA Tracer satellites suffered power problems shortly after launch that disrupted communications. NASA said last week that controllers have reconnected with that spacecraft and are working to recover the spacecraft. The other Tracer satellite worked normally after launch. Tracers launched on a rideshare mission with several other satellites, including NASA's Athena Epic experimental smallsat. NASA said last week that controllers are still working to understand communications issues with it after delays in tracking the spacecraft in orbit.